Hey, what's up, everybody? Happy Friday to you. Bienvenidos to Burn It Down with Kim Brown, the Friday edition. We are happy to see all your smiling faces and shining faces along with us today. Of course, you know Burn It Down is a spot where we set oppression ablaze and believe that a new, better tomorrow is possible. Well, maybe not actually tomorrow. Today's show is titled Stimu-less, and I'm sure you have already heard the news about the proposed second stimulus package that is being ballied about Congress and Capitol Hill, and the White House is in the mix as well. Some speculation that a vote could either happen maybe today, probably over the weekend. But as we dig into the nuts and bolts of what this latest Stimu-less is here to give Americans who are dealing with a raging pandemic, skyrocketing unemployment, soon to be expiring unemployment benefits, in addition to an eviction crisis, in addition to tens of millions of Americans having to go to food banks for the first time. Congress, in their infinite wisdom, have decided that, you know what, we think y'all actually need less money. Yes, less money is what the people need as we approach the holiday season. So we are unhappy with this outcome, and we are going to discuss it today. Also, coming up later in the show, as some of y'all may or may not know, Tuesday's show about the Proud Boys got deleted by YouTube. Not once, but twice. Now, YouTube thankfully restored the show back to the Real News YouTube channel, not back to the Burn It Down with Kim Brand channel, which I'm pissed about, and I'm going to get into all that a little bit later. But while I'm there, while I'm right here, actually, go to the Burn It Down with Kim Brown YouTube page, please, and subscribe. Subscribe right now. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. All right, y'all, it is time to begin the conversation. And I'm very excited, very grateful, and very appreciative to be joined today with Lisa Snowden-McCray. She is the editor of Baltimore Beat. She is also the managing editor here at the Real News Network. And we're also joined with Max Alvarez, host of the Working People podcast and editor-in-chief here at the Real News. I think I said everybody's title correct. It's Friday, y'all. It's been a long week.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's been a very, very long week. You're doing great, Kim. Don't even worry about it.
I appreciate y'all making some time. Thank y'all so much. I'm eternally grateful. But unfortunately, we don't have positive news, unfortunately, to report, everybody, as we are hearing what the negotiations around the stimulus involve. Dwayne, let's go to that article. I think it was at the bottom of the doc. CJNet was doing a quick little recap of what all is in the bill. And basically, what Congress is expected to agree upon for people is going to be a $600 one-time stimulus check for folks. There will be no business liability provisions, which is what Mitch McConnell and the Senate Republicans were really pushing for, having provisions in place for businesses that they could not be held liable for COVID, which was a fucked up provision that is out of there. But at the same time, I guess the compromise is that everyday Americans get decidedly less money, and no federal stimulus for states and local governments, which is going to be bad for the many, many state workers out there across the country who rely on these good government jobs, to keep the lights on. Max, let me start with you. We have not had a vote yet, but it's coming. Oh, by the way, it's also tied to making sure that the government doesn't shut down over the holidays, which is also important. But let me get your initial take on what this latest offering of potentially what the second stimulus could entail.
So, I mean, my initial just gut, response, right, is that, leading up to the election and even long before that, right? I mean, I think we've even talked about it on this show. I know that you've talked about it quite a lot yourself, Kim, is, somewhere along the line in this country, we started talking about compromise as a virtue in and of itself. Right? We started talking about political compromise, reaching across the aisle as, a really valuable virtue, regardless of the substance of that compromise, right? And that's really what Joe Biden ran on, right? He very much ran making this appeal to, never Trump Republicans, constantly tacking to the right, constantly assuring folks that, it wouldn't be the people who actually voted for Joe Biden that he was representing. It would be his presidency would be one that worked harder to represent the people who did not vote for him, and basically leave the rest of us in a lurch, and with a bunch of empty campaign promises. But I really just want to kind of underscore that, like, this is what that compromise looks like, right? Of course, in general, like, being able to represent a country that's so big and so diverse and has so many kind of conflicting populational interests and stuff like that, like, that's important. Of course, I'm not an idiot. Like, we all get that you got to get stuff done somehow, right? Especially when your colleagues are on the complete opposite kind of, or supposedly the opposite ideological side of the spectrum. But what we have seen, and when we actually get like the tangible results of the so-called compromise politics, this is what it looks like. It looks like a half-baked piece of crap offer that really doesn't do anything for people who have been suffering for, this 10 months, and we've gotten one stimulus check so far that, like, was barely enough. Most of it, let's call the stimulus checks what they are. They're landlord subsidies. And we, the citizens, are just kind of like the middleman, right? We basically get a check and then hand it directly to our landlords or something like that. Like, that's compromise. Like, that's the virtue that this new administration is signaling. That's the virtue of the Democratic Party, because we're giving people a couple of crumbs to survive after being battered by this pandemic and the economic crash. And the compromise is that Mitch McConnell didn't just give companies like, a clean bill to excuse themselves from all of the ways that they have endangered working people, to have no liability whatsoever. That's not a compromise. Like, that's still working people getting screwed.
100%. And Lisa, $600 doesn't pay the rent in not one American city, right? Like, $600 is barely grocery money for the month for a family of four, right? And the insult, basically, it is exactly what Max said. This is a landlord subsidy. People are going to use the $600 immediately just to keep a roof over their head for 1 month. But that also doesn't erase the many months, several months of debt that people are racking up for not being able to pay their rent for all this time to begin with. Congress continually shows that they do not understand the needs of average Americans. And what can we do to make them understand that we just had an election? So now we are stuck with these dickheads for at minimum 2 more years.
Oh, you mean really? What can we do?
Well, let me get your take first. Let me get your opinion first on the number 600. I know what your opinion. I know it's trash, right?
Yeah, the number is insulting. It's insulting, yeah. And it's from people who use $600 to, like, go get snacks for popcorn night. Like, these people are ultra rich, the majority of them, and it's like a slap in the face after slaps in the face. I've been working a lot, but, I'm addicted to Twitter like most of us are. So I keep checking on and off, and I keep seeing, like, Mitch McConnell and Vice President Pence be the first people to receive these vaccinations for COVID. So, like, is there any time in our lifetime that it's any more clear the difference between the haves and the have-nots? So we know right now the people that are the most poor of us will not be getting these vaccinations, will be compelled to work even in the midst of a pandemic that is still raging, will not get any financial help, while these people use their money to, create safe spaces for themselves, hurt the intentions of people who try to make the country safer for everybody, and then get these vaccinations that mean they will likely never have to really pay, have to really deal with the most serious, things that can happen to you when you have COVID-19. So it's just really disgusting, and it's disheartening. And, like, I have a friend who, once the election happened, said, this thing happened, but we still have a lot of darkness ahead of us. And like, the only thing, unfortunately, that will save us is all of us working together, because we have a few representatives in Congress, the squad. I think Cori Bush will probably be part of that group that like are actively demonstrating to us in their words and actions that they care about the least of us. But most of them don't, and don't even have the capacity to care. So, the smart of us have the most intelligent of us, the most kind of wily of us, the people that have already been doing the organizing, even before any of us were born, are going to have to use their best resources and figure out how to get us through, because Nancy Pelosi is not going to.
Mm-mm. And we've seen this really across the country with the rise of so many different mutual aid organizations, really helping people on a variety of issues, including making sure that people have food, making sure that people who are housing insecure, have a rent fund to the, extent of, the bail freedom funds that are out there. We were trying to do a show on mutual aid, but these groups are literally slammed right now because the crises are so many and so numerous. But, kind of getting back to the stimulus negotiations, which are still ongoing. I want us to play this clip. It's going to be V2, Dwayne, from the junior senator from, I don't know if he's junior or senior, but he looks like a little doucher. His name is Josh Hawley from Missouri. He stood up in Congress. This was today, actually, or yesterday. I'm sorry, it might have actually been today. But this is the second time this week that Senator Hawley has made a push to have the stimulus amounts, the check amounts be equal to what they were in the first stimulus. I want us to take a look at what he had to say on the floor of the Senate. Dwayne?
What these people ask for, what these Americans ask for, is not for government to solve all their problems. It's not for government to give them a handout. It's a chance to get back on their feet, a chance to provide for themselves, a chance to recover when they have been asked, again, to sacrifice so much. And that is why the least this body can do is to provide direct relief to every working American who needs it. What we did back in March, that every senator voted for, $1,200 for every working individual, $2,400 for working couples, $500 for kids and dependents. It's the least that we can do. It should be the first thing that we can do. And as these negotiations drag on and on, fixated and focused and hung up on who knows what issues, let's start with this. Let's send a message to working families that they're first, not last.
No, Josh, that message is that working families are last and definitely not first when it comes to the priorities of the legislative bodies. And of course, even those who occupy the White House, current and soon to be occupiers of the White House. Max, let me tell y'all how Josh Hawley led off his little impassioned speech there. He was talking about constituents of his who live in rural Missouri who had to go to food banks for the very first time and how devastated they were to have to do so. Understandable. Nobody is diminishing how people are struggling in this country, regardless of what their political ideology is. However, but you heard those Republican little whistles there. We're not asking for a handout. We're not asking government to solve all of our problems. But in effect, that is what they're doing. And it's not to say that they are wrong to do so, but it seems as though now that the poverty and struggle has encapsulated white America too, the rhetoric, the way that the Republicans have governed and have spoken down upon Democratic constituents about quote unquote wanting handouts and all that other shit. Now that language is being parroted back to them by them. What is your take on how the Republicans are having to deal with now so many of their constituents who are facing some of the same critical challenges that Black and brown people have been dealing with for generations?
So I almost don't know where to begin here because I'm so angry that I can barely see straight, right? Because and to be clear, right? I've gotten into this kind of discussion with a couple of folks over the past 2 weeks about this because, this the what is it? What's the saying? The fish stinks from the head on down or whatever. Like Joe Biden made this proclamation like last week. Like this is language that is coming from him and filtering all the way down, right? He said very clearly, like, Americans aren't looking for a handout, right? Blah, 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 blah. Some people, generally white people and generally people who are way more trusting of the political establishment, have kind of pushback against the left's kind of critiques of this talking point. And what they have suggested is that the dog whistling that you were talking about, the signaling the signaling that that Americans are not looking for a handout, that this isn't like socialism or what have you, that's all meant to just placate the right so that we can get people the relief that they need, right? So again, that's a very generous reading on what Hawley and Biden and other kind of establishment Democrats have been saying. But again, what reality are you living in, where that is the most logical kind of reading of what is being said, especially when what we just talked about is that the relief, the non-handout that we're talking about is crap, right? It amounts to barely anything, right? And then I think you realize that in fact, the more logical and necessary and justifiable reading of this crap is that it is it just lays bare the fact that the Democrats of today want to be and have always wanted to be the Republicans of yesterday, right? And this is kind of the full transformation of that, right? The what Josh Hawley was just talking about, what Joe Biden was saying, in the same vein last week, it is quite literally just Ronald Reagan's famous kind of quote from the 80s with written in kind of sparkly marker, right? Where Reagan really kind of, his campaign kind of launched to the stratosphere, especially when he made this line where he said, government is not the solution to people's problems, it is the problem, right? My dad remembers that quote. It was a very resonant quote for people. And now that ideology, that principle has been fully absorbed by the Democratic Party that is supposed to be the opposition to the Republicans, but they're not. They're, and this is what we're going to see for the next 2 years and 4 years, just like we saw, we've seen with Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and all of the kind of new Democrat ghouls who have been pushing this austerity crap for decades because they constantly want to prove to the right that they are fiscally responsible, that they are, not socialists. But realistically, like Lisa said, there's also just the base fact that these people are of and for the ruling class themselves, right? They don't give a shit about working people. They don't give a shit about the plight of the average American. If they did, they'd give us a hell of a lot more than $600 or feel the need to kind of couch that in some sort of careful terminology about how this isn't a handout. I talk to workers all the time. Yes, they do want a fucking handout, and it's not a handout, but because it's our goddamn money. Was the new multi-billion, I think it was $70 billion approval for new money to the defense industry, that's a handout. That's a handout to the military industrial complex with no strings attached. That's our money. And yet when it comes to us, when it comes to actually serving the needs of everyday working people, it has to be so carefully couched in this bullshit language, and everything has to be means tested and tempered to the point that it's basically useless. And I'm tired of it.
Also in that same Senate exchange, Senator Ron Johnson blocked that $1,200 check proposed by Hawley. And it was interesting because I watched Johnson's rebuttal to Josh Hawley. And mind you, they two Republicans, mind you. And Johnson started going on. It was I felt like I was transported back to 1992, 1994. He started going on and on about deficits. The reason why we can't provide people with $1,200 checks is because it's going to send the deficit into the stratosphere. And it's Lisa Snowden-McCray, how many times are we going to go around on this carousel of when the Democrats are in power, they seemingly get very little done. They do some marginal work at best. But yet when Republicans are in power, it is pedal to the metal. They're giving all the tax breaks, all the defense contracts, all the stuff to benefit the elites and those who are in power. But when the power switches again, oh, well, we can't give people this money because of the deficit. Now, that's a Republican talking point. The Democrats are going to come up with something different. But the march to austerity is looming in front of us. I mean, what does this look like when the stimulus, number one, does not provide enough for everyday people, but also no federal or state, no state assistance, no local assistance to local governments coming from the federal government? That troubles me, because that tells me that people who work for the state, people who work for the DMV, people who work in the fire department, these people are about to lose their jobs.
Okay, well, I don't have a perfect thing. I'm going to follow me here. I'm going a few places here. One of the places is like, I don't think that I can talk. It's not possible to talk about this country without talking about race. And so like, there was a lot of things that came to my mind when you played that clip, and Max already said most of them way better. But the thing that I just kind of want to ping before we let that go by is like, we're always willing to do more, not just for kind of power and for the elites, but the story always gets real different when it's people of color, when it's brown and black people. So like, we can paint this nice rosy like picture of like a white picket fence and this white mom and this white dad and their poor white babies struggling. But it becomes very different when it's black people that are struggling. Then, we don't have that money, and the narrative is a little bit different. And even if we are to kind of carry that thing forward of saying like, yes, we're going to get this for all the working families, what I've learned about this country is that white people know how to get in there and put the language in there to make it even like in execution, leave out the people that look like me and the people that look like the people in my family. And I think that's important. So when you talk about government workers also being hurt, I think about kind of where you call home, Kim, like the Washington, D.C. area, where there's so many Black families that have been able to raise families, buy homes, send their kids to college because they have good government jobs. And that won't happen anymore. That's a way of affecting generational change for the worse. And so I'm just like, when we talk about these things, there's just like, I hate that our only hopes are the Democrats because they're not up in this fight. They are always willing, like, again, as Max said, kind of more eloquently than I could, to kind of acquiesce to whatever Republican talking points exist, even if they make no sense. It makes no possible sense to say the government, which is govern is in there, has no ruling on our life. Then why are we paying taxes? Like, that's what we made them for, because all of us don't have time to go individually, like, get the nation's streets fixed and like all the other things that we need to do. We all decided to have a governing body that takes care of that stuff. It doesn't make any sense but for so long, everybody's just let these things pass. So like, again, I'm going to have to take it to like the people. Like, I feel like my job as a journalist is to dismantle a lot of this stuff. Like, I'm always yelling about Maryland's Governor Larry Hogan because I'm in Maryland. And I see so much foolishness play out, but it's like, it's a microcosm of a bigger problem. So like Larry Hogan in Maryland does something stupid and we all let it pass because he's, representative of some kind of white capitalist dream that we are still subscribing to. Meanwhile, he's really super bad at his job. So I don't know. I went a lot of places and I'm going to end it now. There you go.
Well,
Listen,
can I hop in for a sec?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I mean, just to kind of build on what both of you were saying, because it's like, I think that what we're overwhelmed with is just like, this is such a kind of stunning kind of exemplification of everything that like you would expect the opposition party or, the so-called Democratic Party, you would expect them to try at least a little bit harder to hide this kind of thing. But in fact, they're laying it out, like for everyone to see because they actually feel like there's nothing to be ashamed of about it, right? Or they feel like people have no power to do anything about it. And I think that that's perhaps one of the most telling aspects of this, right? Is that we've seen, as you said, Kim, like we've seen this deficit hawkery bullshit like time and time again. And it follows the same freaking cycle every time, right? When Republicans are in power, or when Democrats are in power, right, they take the bait of the Republicans constantly calling them socialists and saying that like they're not fiscally responsible. And so then the Democrats don't do shit when it comes to actually kind of providing the services that people need, including a lot of the things that Democrats actually run on to get elected in the first place. Once they get in there, they're no longer beholden to their constituents. If they ever were, they're beholden to their opponents, which is like, you know, which is incredible. And they're beholden to their own big donors and the power brokers that really kind of, you know, the party answers to, right? But when they're in power, then they buy into this deficit hawk, you know, bullshit, and then they don't do what, you know, they promised that they would do, because their Republican colleagues are saying that, you know, that's the way it's got to be. Like if people don't believe me, go back to like 2008 and look at kind of all the articles that were coming out from like these Republicans who just wanted to kind of offer President Obama, you know, some advice on how to govern and how to reach across the aisle, right? It's a way, it's a tactic. It's a way of getting what you want even after you lost. And the Republicans are incredibly good at doing that because the Democrats are so goddamn susceptible to it, because that's actually who they want to be, right? That's actually where they want to be and what they want to do. And so when the Democrats are in power, they get locked into this deficit hawkery kind of cycle. And then when Republicans are in power, like you said, Kim, they stop giving a shit about the deficit. They start passing massive tax breaks that blow a massive hole in the deficit. They start getting us into more wars and increasing, you know, military spending even more. Not like it doesn't increase under Democrats as well, which it does. That also, you know, like blows more holes in the deficit. The deficit is a kind of, you know, governmental and rhetorical widget that is constantly used to keep the government from actually providing for working people like it's fucking supposed to, right? That is, like Lisa said, that's what a government is supposed to do. But like even the fact that we are taking this neoliberal talking point that like the government is going to solve everyone's problems, like that's a real seismic kind of shift from what, you know, government has traditionally been understood to do. And I think that people should really think long and hard about what that actually means, because it's not just that the government is relinquishing its very duties to the people that it governs. It is actually ceding those duties. It is surrendering them to the private sector. It is giving those over to the market. That's the thing that I think the left has been missing when it discusses neoliberalism and kind of how the Democrats are the embodiment of neoliberalism. Is it's not just the fact that the market logics have kind of infused government itself so that the way that people govern in DC is to kind of make the state more responsive to and make it serve the needs of the market. But in fact, the other side of that is that we have, like, our elected officials have essentially given over the power of government to the private sector, to the market, right? People announcing layoffs, bosses having control over your day-to-day life, jobs being kind of outsourced to other countries where they can exploit workers. Like, that has more of an impact on people's lives than a lot of legislation that's passed, but we don't call it government for some reason. But it is. It governs our lives way more than what we call government really does. And the Democrats have been just as culpable in handing governmental power over to the market as Republicans have.
Yeah, and let me just make this last point about the Johnson-Hawley debate that happened on the Senate floor. Ron Johnson made the point. He dug into the Wayback Machine for this one. When he talked about the deficit and why we can't give people bigger stimulus checks, the deficit, blow a hole in the deficit. He said, "We are mortgaging our children's future." I said, bro, I've heard that for the last 20 years from Republicans. That exact same phrase. It's like, man, you guys got to come up with some new lingo. But I wanted to move along, y'all, because many a politician, well, maybe not many, but a handful of notable ones, including, Senator Bernie Sanders and some of the other, more progressive members of Congress, have long decry that we need a bigger stimulus. I wanted to play a clip from a politician who made a case for an even bigger stimulus than the 2.2 trillion one that was proposed by Democrats that actually passed the House. And you might be surprised at who this politician was who said the 2.2 trillion was not enough. Dwayne, let's check that out.
It's very simple. I want to do it even bigger than the Democrats. Now, not every Republican agrees with me, but they will. But I want to do it even bigger than the Democrats because this is money going to people that did not deserve what happened to them coming out of China. Now, to just put it very simply, we want to do it, but Nancy Pelosi doesn't want to do it. We'll see whether or not she changes her mind. But we want to do it because people need help and they should get help.
Well, she's at 2.4.
The economy is very strongly coming back.
Mr. President, she's at 2.4 trillion, and you want to go bigger than that? John Thune says
she's at 2.2.
Okay.
And I would like to go. I would be willing to go more because I think that. Number one, I view it differently. We get the money back. The government, it gets the money back ultimately anyway. And it's better than unemployment, and it's better than all of the other costs associated with the alternative. So I want to go, I would rather go bigger than that number, but we'll see. But here's the problem. She doesn't want to do anything until after the election because she thinks that helps her. I actually think it helps us because everyone knows that she's the one that's breaking up the deal. Now, they are talking. Let's see what happens. But I would rather go bigger than her number.
Senator Thune.
Now, we all know Donald Trump is a lying liar, and we can't believe anything that comes out of his mouth, and he will say things surely out of convenience. But that was back in October, y'all. And the recent news that was floating around today, Dwayne, pop that tweet up for me if you could. Reports are coming out of the White House that apparently White House aides had to tell Trump to shut the fuck up. And he actually listened to them this time. I don't know why they couldn't get him to shut the fuck up for the previous 4 years. But allegedly, White House aides intervened Thursday to prevent Donald Trump from demanding Congress approve checks of $2,000 per person. This is reported by Washington Post, Jeff Stein. And, you know, y'all, I mean, we don't do a whole lot of talking about Trump because I feel like Trump is pretty self-explanatory. Everything Trump is about, we oppose, right? I don't have to go on here and bash Trump. Just assume that I have a default position of hating Donald Trump in each one of his positions. But I found it so interesting that his aides, at least if this report is to be believed, like had to really shut him up for fear out of blowing up the negotiations. And I'm like, well, who did they think he was going to piss off? His own party or Pelosi and Schumer and them, Lisa Snowden? I mean, what? Trump want to give us more money? And the people said no. Make it make sense.
Number one, broken clocks are right. What is it? One time, twice a day?
Twice a day, yes.
Second, like, yeah, I mean, I think that's more, that speaks to the stuff that we've been talking about where like, maybe those two sides aren't so different after all. Max
Alvarez, your thoughts. Donald Trump wanted to give you so much money. Don't you wish you would have voted for Trump? I am kidding. Go ahead, sir. What is your opinion about Trump being actually made to shut up? I can't believe that he actually heeded the advice of his aides on this instance. But what's your take on this?
I mean, kind of the same bafflement that Lisa was expressing, because it's just like, yeah, Trump may blow up talks if he helps people. Like, then what are the talks about, right? You know, what is the point of them, right? If the deal breaker out of all of that is providing people the actual need that the aid that they most need right now, then like it tells you everything you need to know, that whatever's being discussed in these talks is not us. It's not the people. It's not the people that the government is supposed to serve, right? It's the kind of, you know, partisan horse race point scoring bullshit that you know has plagued kind of Washington politics at our collective expense for as long as it's been around, right? I mean, like, and you know, I guess I would say that like the surface kind of tells you everything you need to know. There is a lot more that we can deduce if the deeper that we go, right? Because like, you know, I think one of the things that I was thinking of when we started this conversation and that I kind of maybe mentioned earlier when I was rambling for a long time is, this could only really happen. All of the things that we've been talking about, right? I'm constantly asked by workers around in other parts of the world. They're like, "Why don't you guys rise up against this? This is absurd." And I think it's because we've grown up in a country where we have been told and have in fact eventually become convinced that this is all we're worth. Right? We've been told long before this pandemic ever happened that we are worthless to this country and to capitalism. Only insofar as like it can squeeze labor out of us. It can squeeze, like military service out of us. Right? I mean, like other than that, our genuine kind of bare humanity means nothing to this system. Right? And so, I think that the thing is like we're trying to kind of rationalize something that has been created over so many decades to be so inhumane and to be such a kind of dysfunctional sham of what government should be, that we, the people who are ostensibly served by that government, have really just accepted and convinced ourselves that we are as worthless as this system treats us. And I think that that's very evident in like the whole conversation we're having about these stimulus checks, right? Because what Trump is doing is not the right answer either. I'll take that $2K check. I don't give a shit if he does it or Nancy Pelosi does it. My family needs it. Our people need it. I don't care where it comes from. I don't care who gets the kind of that month of political point scoring on mainstream media. That doesn't matter to me. Like what matters to me is that people have the sustenance that they need to survive. But what Trump is doing is like a version of what he's done his whole presidency, right? What he has tried to do is provide bits and pieces of government as long as he can dole them out like a king would, right? Like when he could like grant clemency. Like if you watch football or basketball, this was his pitch to Black America and to, basically people of color in general was like, Joe Biden kind of created the criminal justice system that has plagued your communities for so long. But I, king that I am, have granted clemency to these people, right? Out of the goodness of my own heart. And so really government gets transmuted into Trump himself like a kind of king would, right? And he did that with, I think in his first month. Remember when he handed his first paycheck to the parks guy, and the guy's face was just like, really? You're giving me your first paycheck after you just cut the like parks budget by like $2 million or something like that? Like the thing that matters is that it's Trump who's giving it. It's the gesture that empowers him, not the government itself. So that's Trump's model of this. But what the Democratic model is that we have eroded, and the Democrats have overseen this erosion of the very fabric of government to the point that the stimulus checks should not count as much as they currently would if we got them, because they should be supported by a social safety net that still exists. Democrats and Republicans have eroded that social safety net, social services. They've hollowed out our cities and our towns over decades, to the point that we have now ended up during a pandemic where there's no net to catch anybody. And the best we can hope for is that the government finds some of our own money to throw back at us so that we can pay rent. But that, like, the problem is the result of decades of austerity and mismanagement and inhumanity shown towards American people.
Yeah, and that's my big concern, is that all of those austerity policies are just going to accelerate as the conditions worsen. And if you think shit is bad now, as terrible as 2020 has been, it doesn't make me all that optimistic about 2021. The only thing I'm glad about 2021 is that it's not going to be 2020, because this has been just a god awful year. I wanted us to go along. Dwayne, pop up T2 for me, because all of these conversations that have been having around the stimulus, around political power, around how people from the progressives and people on the left build political power, trying to elect more progressives to office. Former Maryland Congressman John Delaney this morning on Twitter said the quiet part out loud. He said, "It is more important that Biden's cabinet is diverse than if it's moderate or progressive. Very little policy gets done in DC. But what endures is changing how young people think of government. When they see leaders who look like them, they are inspired. Changes that the world, and it changes the world. Okay, now the part that he wasn't probably supposed to say is that basically diversity, as it's being perhaps modeled in the Biden administration and even in the Trump administration in many instances in government before, is that the diversity is sort of working as tokenism and making sure that the institutions of government, the institutions of power still remain as they are, so long as there are representative faces to make young people still believe that this idea and notion of American democracy and American exceptionalism, the whole pull yourself up by your bootstraps, is still very much a possibility for you if you yourself work hard enough. And I wanted to get y'all's take on that, because we're seeing a lot of disaffected voters already, where people who supported some of these progressive Congress people and were very disappointed in the fact that, number one, there's a very good chance that Nancy Pelosi could still retain her speakership in the House, despite Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez this week on the Intercept podcast saying that Pelosi and Schumer need to go because, you know, they're very old, and that's not a diss towards old people, but you might want to retire after 80. I mean, it's just something that you might want to consider as you head into the, you know, you become an octogenarian. But what is this idea, Lisa, about, you know, we have a few representatives of diversity and of progressivism, but at the end of the day, what are they actually able to get done versus this white power structure, whether or not it's liberal white supremacy or conservative white supremacy?
Greetings from Baltimore, where the people who are locking up brown bodies are Black. Where Marilyn Mosby is still ordering children who have been locked up for months held without bail. Where her husband, Nick Mosby, who's the city council president, has said that defunding the police is like this emotional pipe dream that like some hippies are talking about. Yeah, Baltimore already taught me that it doesn't matter whether the hand that's holding you down is brown or white if it's still holding you down.
Max Alvarez, John Delaney deleted that tweet. I wonder who hit him up. Like, no, John, you gotta take that shit down, dog. Like, you can't just shh, you gotta be quiet, John. He deleted the tweet. I thought that was pretty telling. What are your thoughts about that sentiment that he shared with us all and then took back?
Well, I mean, the it's hard because, like, yeah, like there's so much about this to say that I feel like we've all said at some point or another, and I've already talked enough on this episode, so I'll keep my comments short. But you know, I think he was probably pressured to take it down. My sense is he was pressured to take it down, not because it was untrue, but because he was saying the quiet part out loud, right? You know, like it's because it was very true, right? It's because it exposes, like, quite bluntly what this whole kind of circus is about. And I include the media in that circus. The media has been a very willing handmaid, you know, to this kind of neoliberal hollowed out representational politics, where what matters is just that, like, yeah, we populate systems of oppression and the upper echelons of government with the kind of more diverse, you know, a murderer's row of more diverse faces. That doesn't mean shit to anyone, you know, like, in fact, it's doing a lot of, you know, sinister work, right? Because it is painting a system that does active, systemic, constant, and historical harm to the very people that John Delaney thinks are being inspired by it. The government has been doing that harm to Black people since its foundation, right? To Indigenous people since before its foundation, to disabled people, right? To people of color, to LGBTQA people, right? This government, hand in glove with the military-industrial complex, with the imperialist war machine that exacts violence upon the global South, and with the kind of private market that squeezes people to the point where most of us are one paycheck away from, being out on the street, right? The government is complicit in that violence. And the more that you work to convince people by the nature of the races and genders and abilities that are represented in the kind of halls of power, the more that you use that to convince people that the government is working in their interests, that's a really sinister thing. And it really, I think that John Delaney really was just saying the quiet part out loud, which is, that's exactly what the Biden administration and the media have really been saying every day, that they've been like, oh, we've got the first Black, person who's going to be running this agency, the first woman to run this agency. But those agencies are killing people. They're hurting people. They're imprisoning people. They're pushing people into poverty. I don't give a shit, what the color of the person who's running it is. The system that agency itself is doing a bad thing for a lot of people. Why are we celebrating? How hollow is this type of politics when this is all it takes to kind of inspire people in the way that John Delaney is talking about? It's maddening.
And Kim, if I could just add, it's also when you veer into tokenism, which is basically kind of what it seems like he's talking about, it means that we all avoid doing the work of actually interrogating the isms that we all have, because we were all born out of this racist, sexist ism, everything society. So when there could be time where the Democrats, or where all of us, could politically be looking like, how are we, how are we treating people that have been marginalized or who do not have white skin? How do we actually empower those people? That's work that he's avoiding by just saying, okay, we're just going to shove some minorities in those positions and go on about their day. And that's the thing that really, all of us across every every well-intentioned political spectrum, including the most leftiest of us, need to really be talking about, because that shows up. I mean, I'm sure that you can find people in, leftist organizations now that feel like that's the same thing that's happening there. So if we actually want equity, if we actually want to do better, then we all have to actually do that work. And it's not as easy as just like I said, shoving somebody in a seat and being like, there, we did it.
Well, and especially when the people that are selected, the people of color, the women, the Black men, the Black women, Latinas, Latinx, all these so-called firsts in their position, basically who these people are who is most palatable to the white power structure, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we do have a Black for that, and we love Gerald. Gerald pushed that broom better than, and that's not a diss, but y'all understand what I'm saying. This person has had to shape themselves in a way to be acceptable by white people in power, by white men in power, and it's is that the kind of Black person I want in that leadership position? I don't think so.
Well, and this is, I mean, I guess to add one more thing, right? I say this as a Latino who grew up conservative, right? Republicans do this as well, right? It's part and parcel of the whole power structure, right? There were a lot of powerful kind of conservative folks who, once they learned about me, were very eager to kind of get me on their side because they could trot me out as an example, right? They do this with Black men, Black women all the time. They do this with Condoleezza Rice and Colin Powell and what have you, right? I mean, you're absolutely right, Kim, that to get to that position, you will not get to that position unless you have allowed yourself to be molded by that system into what it needs you to be. And even I think if you have the best of intentions, right? It's to kind of just underline what Lisa was saying, right? It's even if the person in power is a really great person, it doesn't all come down to them. That's another, I think, larger part of this kind of systemic, a larger systemic overhaul in our thinking that needs to happen is a rotten system is not going to kind of be fixed by a couple of well-meaning people, right? That's the greatest lie that the West Wing ever told, right? Is that that's not going to happen, right? Because the system protects itself. It embeds itself, and it builds an infrastructure around these sorts of positions to ensure that even, the most radical of legislators, can never achieve on their own what we all need to achieve together through mass movements, through collective pressure, and through, workplace organizing and the like.
Oh, and you said a word right there, Max, and you hit on the last point I want us to get into before we adjourn for the weekend. Poor AOC. And I say that, sort of tongue in cheek. I like AOC, but, I don't have her poster on my wall or nothing like that. But she got suckered last night. Okay. Alex Salmon from the prospect.org broke this story on social media. He has a very detailed thread. Keep that up for a moment, Dwayne, because I'm going to read through a couple of these through his tweets. He says, last night, in a surprise last-second meeting, the Democratic Party ambushed progressives in a major way, locking them out of crucial seats on powerful Energy and Commerce Committee and keeping AOC out of a position she thought she was a lock for. Goes on. The outcome was a shock for progressives, whose strategy has revolved around building the lasting power through top committee appointments. Alex Salmon, the reporter, says that he got some inside information on what was said and done in a wild closed-door steering committee meeting yesterday. I encourage you to go to theprospect.org and check out this piece. It's titled "The Establishment Strikes Back." His reporting goes on to talk about how Henry Cuellar, who is an influential Democrat, did not support her membership, or her appointmentship, rather, to these committees, because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez backed Cuellar's primary opponent, Jessica Cisneros. Now, despite having her formal support, Alex reports, the moderates forced an exceptional rare vote, which basically froze AOC out of this committee leadership position that she thought she was a lock for, instead putting in more conservative people in these positions. So, and again, this all happened allegedly last night, and this comes on the heels of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez telling The Intercept that she thought it was time for Pelosi and Schumer to go, which, according to Alex Salmon, helped to influence this maneuvering in these committee hearings that moderate and congressional Democrats were having. Lisa, I feel like the progressive members of Congress, the incumbent ones like AOC and the new ones coming in like Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman, I mean, this was a signal being sent to them. Like, listen, little boys and girls, like, y'all don't have no real juice on Capitol Hill. And we're going to prove that y'all don't have no juice by putting you in your place. I think this sends a terrible message to the left coming from the establishment, but I think it definitely sets the tone for what the Biden administration is going to be. It's going to be very contentious between progressives and moderate centrist Democrats. I mean, what do you make of this?
I mean, I think that I'm sure that AOC and the rest of those folks understand that this is a long game. Like, it's not, the wins are going to be harder, because all of those people only got there because they already beat lots of entrenched nastiness and racism and sexism to get those seats. So it's disappointing. It means it's really more bad news for all of us who like to breathe clean air and drink clean water than it is for AOC. Like, I think that they are, folks, she won her seat easily. She understands being a fighter means that you have to be smarter. And so the few folks that are on the side of justice in Congress have to be fighters to have gotten there. And folks like those entrenched folks, like the Nancy Pelosi's and those kind of established folks, those people have gotten lazy and weren't that great to begin with. Like we just talked about how they let the Republicans run over them for our whole lifetimes. So, I mean, it's disappointing. I don't think it's surprising for anybody who is on the left and who knew what was going to happen with Joe Biden. But I think, like, it's like I said, it's going to be a long battle.
Max Alvarez, I'm sure you've been paying attention to this discussion, let's call it a discussion that's been happening in progressive spaces, especially on social media, with progressive commentator Jimmy Dore, who I had never heard of before this week. I'm sorry, I try to limit the amount of straight white male opinion voices that I consume. So I had never even heard of Jimmy Dore. I'm like, all right, who the fuck is Jimmy Dore? But okay, so Jimmy Dore, y'all know who he is. Jimmy Dore had a lot of smoke for AOC, and so did some other progressive commentators, that she's not, really flexing her popularity muscle. Like, AOC's popular out here in these streets. Like, they think that she needs to use that to wield her big platform in ways to bully establishment Democrats into doing some more progressive things. But I feel like I don't know. Like, I feel like this was the Pelosi method of telling her, like, we don't give a shit how many followers you got on Twitter. This is how it's going to be. Well, what is your take on how AOC, unfortunately, has been used in a way by the left and by the center, and she kind of ends up being the loser this week, it appears?
I mean, it's tough because I started trying to kind of get a handle on the discourse this week, and then I checked out because I was like, this seems awful and annoying. And ultimately, I think that people that I respect have made some good arguments. I thought Brianna Joy Gray had a really kind of a few interesting points to make in a piece for Current Affairs that people should check out if they want kind of some more background on that. I would very much kind of cede any kind of worthwhile things to say on that particular topic to the the non-white kind of commentators who have been offering a lot of great thoughts on it but don't get as much credit for it. But I think that I take it in stride the way that kind of Lisa was expressing kind of earlier in this conversation, right? Is like I try to think about what this means in the larger context of the political struggle that we're all a part of, right? The ongoing class war, right? The ongoing kind of hegemony of white supremacy and male supremacy, and all of the kind of interlocking kind of systems that have embedded themselves within the government and the economy and our culture, right? So what I mean by that is that, at the same time that this kind of discussion was happening and seemed to really be polarizing people, right? I've been working with, the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades, who are really pushing for passing the PRO Act, right? Which would dramatically reverse over a century of anti-worker kind of legislation and laws that have kind of really put workers, so far behind the bosses in terms of the power that they're able to actually express, even in, like the most progressive meaning of institutions, right? Like there's still so many ways that workers can get legally fucked over and denied their rights. And something like the PRO Act would really empower them. And these unions, like IUPAT, are kind of really working to not just rely on the good graces of people like Chuck Schumer and Joe Biden to pass it for them. They know the score, right? They know that like they need to build up the strength of the labor movement and use that strength to kind of flex its muscle. That's the muscle that AOC has been flexing her muscles a lot, right? AOC has done a lot. She's not always going to knock it out of the park, but like she's, as far as I'm concerned, she's holding up her end of the bargain, right? But like we can't expect her to solve all of like these problems for us, or the squad, or any number of legislators, when we have this vast army of working people who are fed up, who have been screwed over, and who are looking to one another and to organizations like unions and mutual aid groups and, just like their own communities to really kind of demand what they need. And that, I think, is the bigger muscle that needs to kind of be built up, that needs to be flexed, and that we need to see ourselves as kind of part of, not just kind of like, throwing kind of our comments from the peanut gallery and hoping a few people in power like actually work for us, but in fact, like really build the people power to demand and force the hand of those who are in power. And, I guess I would just kind of end that by saying that, because it's not just like the entrenched Democratic figures like Pelosi that we're up against, right? This kind of exchange that happened, this kind of the way that AOC was screwed over, and she wasn't the only one who was screwed over out of a kind of appointment that progressives were expecting to get. I think viewers, you kind of know what's at stake here. You know what's at play, right? You know that like when it comes to energy and commerce, who do you think is going to really be kind of telling Pelosi and Schumer and everybody else that this person cannot get within a mile of this because, we on the industry side will not let it happen. We will take away your money. We will throw that money at your kind of opponents, and kind of the people really pulling the strings again are the government of private industry that very obviously had a hand in this and will always kind of have a hand in it. And you can't like expect any one person, no matter how great of a politician they are, to be able to take that on by themselves.
Wow. Guys, we're going to leave it right there. We've been joined today with Mr. Sagittarius himself. It's the birthday boy, Maximillian Alvarez. Y'all wish Max happy birthday in the comments. He's going to go back and read all the comments and to make sure that y'all wished him a happy birthday. Max, happy birthday. Thank you for making some time to be on the show today. I truly, truly appreciate that.
Thank you for having me on, Kim. And to everyone watching, please, 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 please follow Burn It Down with Kim Brown at Burn It Down KB on Twitter. Support the Burn It Down channel. Share these episodes. Reach out to her if you have topics you want covered, people you want on. Support this show. It's a great and necessary and essential show, and we need to give it all the support that we can because we need it on the left now more than ever.
That is incredibly kind of you, Max. I really appreciate that. And for people suggesting guests, don't suggest to me Tariq Nasheed. I've seen that a couple times.
No.
Stop telling me I need to have Tariq Nasheed on the show because it's not going to happen. Lisa Snowden-McCray, thank you with the most amazing twist out. Just killing it today on the screen, sis. I appreciate you both so much for your support, for your compassion, and y'all are just great people. You know what I mean? We gonna be cool even after the real news situation is over. But I appreciate the both of you in more ways than one. But I especially appreciate y'all coming on today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kim.
Hey guys. Okay, I'm gonna be real quick because we've got some comments from the comments. Unless who is this texting me? Not Dwayne. Okay. Let's see. Comments from the comments. Thank you very much. Molly Shaw manned the chat today because Genevieve has been off and my life has been in complete disarray for these past 3 days that Genevieve has been away. So thank you, Molly Shaw, for stepping up. June Burden says both houses passed a $740 billion defense spending bill, but hey, $300 unemployment check or $600 stimulus check for all is a bit too much. Yeah, how about that? They have all the money for Raytheon, all the money for all them extra Bamas, but nothing for us. Braithwaite, Bone Spurs, Quackerbush. Where the fuck do y'all come up with these names, y'all? They say peanuts are a luxury item now. How about that? It's y'all. We are heading to dark times that I know Gen X and the millennials perhaps never thought we would see, but voila, here we are. Kelly Cantu says, I told everyone voting for Biden would be the same packaging with a different bow. Hey, a lot of us tried to say it, but unfortunately, the way the political system is set up, I mean, what the fuck, what was we going to do? Vote for Trump? I didn't vote. Let me just put that out there. I live in Maryland. Maryland already decided for me. Zach Sherman says, I hate to say it, but capital has won for the most part. Maybe you meant capitalism, my dear. People are afraid to strike. That is correct because everyone is so precarious, right? And then the liberals are too comfortable. Y'all follow Miriam Kaba on Twitter at Prison Culture, right? Sometimes she locks her account. You may not be able to follow her right now. But anyway, she said something that I thought was very profound and believe this as our final thought for the most part. She says, if the French had only received $1,200 stimulus from the government one time throughout this duration of the pandemic, the country would be incinerated. We as Americans, we are some lames, y'all. And I think it's because we are conditioned, number one, by the police state. We are afraid to get in trouble. We're afraid to go to jail. If you're a person of color, you are triply and doubly and quadruply afraid of that outcome. But they got us. And at some point, the reason why all these oppressive systems are able to flourish is because we buy into them, whether or not we believe that we do, but in a sense that we do. So we got to figure out how to shake our collective psyche awake and be like, no, y'all, this is not going to fly. And if shit has to burn, we have to burn it down. We might have to burn it down. Okay, y'all. Now that's the end of the show. Real quick, if you're looking for the Proud Boys episode from Tuesday, it lives again on the Real News YouTube channel. I filed an appeal with YouTube to get it back on the Burn It Down with Kim Brown channel. So hopefully YouTube does the right thing. YouTube, do the right thing. Don't silence a Black woman exposing the danger to public safety that white supremacy and domestic terrorism poses. That's the show. Gang, have a great weekend. We'll see y'all on Tuesday. Don't forget, COVID is out here jumping on people. I don't want it to jump on you. Wear your mask, social distance, wash your hands. Have a good one. See y'all later. Bye-bye. Phew.